Hello? There we go. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to talk with you about interviewing autistics, about science fiction narratives and pandemic temporalities. One caveat that I want to be upfront about is that this analysis is in its very, very early stages. I'm very open to suggestions if anybody has them. This is me venturing out of my field of expertise into a new one. So I'm very, very happy for even more of a comment, really. So quick overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my preliminary theory, then my interview methods, then some findings, and future work. So this word kakakairos I borrowed from Remy Ergo to use it to describe autistic and more broadly neurodivergent temporalities. And my case studies in doing this, so this is me taking a whole paper and condensing it down into one slide. The paper is forthcoming in January in Poetics Today. Feel free to email me after if you'd like an advance copy. And my case studies are Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut and Story of Your Life by Ken Shum. And I chose these because they look at tensions between different experiences of time. Each narrative contrasts serial experiences of time where one moment follows the next, and simultaneous ones where all of time is experienced all at once. And what's really notable is that their protagonists occupy a hybrid of the two. And this hybridity is useful for me in thinking about neurodivergent time, because on top of our own internal clocks, well, there's neurotypical society, chrononormativity that we have to navigate. So sort of a hybrid awareness, and naturally thinking with Du Bois on this. And it's in a special issue on time loops that I co-edited. It has almost nothing to do with time loops, but you know, that's how it goes. And if you've seen the film Arrival, this is that word kakakairos, rendered in Heptapod B by neurodivergent artist Archer Rizzo. Feel free to ask me more about that, but this is a picture worth like 10,000 words at least. But there's one key problem here. Autistic temporalities diverge from normative temporalities, but also each other, sometimes in ways that are mutually exclusive. So one of my interviewees said, time is linear for me. Whereas, you know, like in the humanities, linear anything is awful. Right? But that's the thing, though. In theorizing neurodivergent temporalities, I can't demean anybody's particular experiences. So we need something capacious. You know, generally it's absurd for a single person to theorize these in isolation. So a partial solution to this, I'm not going to say it's a you know, bulletproof solution, but interview other autistics. Make sure it's not just my voice. So that paper is just me, my preliminary thoughts, but what I'm going to talk to you about are other people's experiences. And yes, so let's continue with that. So the method. I was very lucky to receive $4,500 from Ohio State, or sorry, the Ohio State, and it was a alumni grant for graduate research and scholarship. And so the previous paper was a dissertation chapter for me. What I'm talking about here sort of was a dissertation chapter. I only analyzed 2 of the 15 interviews in the dissertation. It turns out interview-based work is a lot to do. But last summer I conducted 15 Zoom interviews. And within about a 2-week span. One was beforehand and 2 were after, but it was a very chaotic period. And the interviews lasted about 2 hours each. I think they were, I calculated the average the other day, it's 2 hours and 20 seconds was the average. So I have like 30 hours of footage to dig into. And the requirements for participants, they had to be self-identified autistic adults. I believe self-diagnosis is the core criterion for any means of neurodivergence. And they had to be familiar with either of the 2 prior narratives or Arrival, the film adaptation of Story of Your Life, or The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. And that's because all of these are sort of core to how I think about cognitive hierarchies. Naturally, none of them had actually read my paper beforehand, like I sent it to them, which is, or wait, no, I think that the one person that I knew in advance did read it, but we didn't really build off of it, which I think is for the best. I didn't corrupt them, at least before the interviews. I think we had people tuning in from 4 continents. I can't remember if anybody was actually in Europe at the time, but like I had people who like grew up there. And North America, South America, Asia, and maybe Europe, I can't remember exactly. The genders were all over the place. I myself, non-binary, they, them, but anything goes. And overall pretty white. I think like 2/3 of the people were white, but like very, very, very educated. Where like I think I had 2 people who were in like special needs education growing up, and told like that they would never go to college. One of them is now in a master's program, and loads of academics, all different steps of the pipeline, so to speak. And I can't remember the details. I'm very sorry. So this is me just kind of like saying off the top of my head things that stood out here. I'm planning to gather demographic info with like a Google form. I need to follow up with everybody. And I want to be very clear, this is not a representative sample. I'm not going to say, these are the autistic experiences. No, I want to be very explicit, that's not what I'm saying here. By centering these conversations around narratives, on the one hand, it lets me avoid the jargon of temporal phenomenology, which is notoriously complicated. But it also does put constraints on people who can participate because they need to be able to engage with narratives. Even an interview, it's difficult to conduct if somebody has limited access to verbiage, whether spoken or written. But nevertheless, I think it's a pretty interesting sample. So the interview technique, I am, or rather was, an amateur interviewer. And I developed this technique on the go as the interviews unfold. I'm trying to frame this as a feature rather than a bug. A few people who've influenced my interview style over the years: Howard Silverman, when I did my MA at Pacific Northwest College of Art, where I used to be a physics professor; Amy Schumann, who was one of my PhD co-chairs; Rua Williams, who interviewed me back in spring 2021; and Reed Vickers, who was one of my interviewees. I do have their permission to name them here. And they are currently engaged in a project where they are interviewing queer elders in Barbados and the Caribbean writ large. I had a script with 23 questions that I sent to them beforehand, so nobody was going to get caught off guard. The early ones, I stuck pretty closely to the script. The later ones, I actually just encouraged people to pursue tangents, and that's sort of why I'm stuck with 30 hours. But it's exciting that I'm looking forward to going into this. I think on social media, Rua has a joke where they say like, become unhingeable, and that's sort of what I did with these interviews. One thing that's very important is I actively embraced autistic communicative practices. In case you haven't been able to recognize it, I'm autistic myself. Oh no, bombshell. I have multiply neurodivergent, ADHD, a few other things as well. I'm like a walking DSM. One thing was a collaborative interruption. If I thought I knew what my interviewees were going to say, I'd blurt it out. And in a lot of contexts, that's rude, but in these contexts, they'd be like, oh yeah. And we'd save 5 minutes of them explaining, and then also they'd be like, oh, this is somebody who gets it. And there were misfires. And they doubled as opportunities to really build that connection. So it really depends on your context. What is considered rude, what is considered not, which makes sense. I would share relatable stories with them. Things like, oh yeah, that reminds me of this and this. And of course, loop back to, as you were saying after, not like, the spotlight was on them, but conversing with the crew behind the camera, or on the other end of the camera, I suppose, was important. And I forgot to mention, it was in there, but these were over Zoom. So that really simplified recording. And like at one point, I caught myself talking about the weather with one of my interviews and just interrupted like, no, we're talking neurotypically here. And then we just segue back to something more interesting. So that's the technique. What are some findings? So these are people's responses to question 17. Do you feel like the COVID-19 pandemic has altered your experience of time? If so, how? Because that was everybody's experience of COVID, right? Like you grab a bucket of Coronas and you just go to the beach and unwind. Like that's what this pandemic was, right? And to be clear, I'm being very, very sarcastic here. Like no. I mean, I wish it was that. I just like to include pictures, and oh, geez, 2 minutes. Okay. Well then, I can probably share about 2 of these with you. One person said the last 2.5 years felt like a pit of time, and I don't think that I could reliably recall, 8-second pause, how things went during the pandemic. And now I think in small ways time feels like a pit in my everyday life as well. Sinking in and long-term changes. Respondent 6 said, mostly yes, but I think the more honest answer is no. I feel like what it has actually done is make it so that people understand what I mean when I say that time has stopped working. And this is somebody who talked elsewhere in the interview about some pretty intense traumas. Again, that beach image was not serious. Respondent 7, it has for sure, like these years, like they don't feel like to me like it's still 2020 to me sometimes. Like the people that I care about mostly, I just see them over the internet, like even 3 years because it's still not safe. This is somebody who's immunocompromised. Respondent 13, I felt like I was losing my imagination, which is really scary, for like what could be the next phase of my life beyond the pandemic. It induced a certain experience of a kind of suspension, like being forced to be with the present moment for an indefinite time. I meant to compare this with a passage from Charles Hughes' How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, where the present indefinite tense is a big part of it. And yeah, unfortunately, I was throwing these slides together last night at like 2 a.m. Those 2 years just went by really fast, which I sadly need to do with this slide. And last one, respondent 15 said, I don't think it did a whole lot to alter my experience of time. Again, mutual exclusive experiences of time. This person was living in central Kansas at the time. And the social reality there is that the community didn't change that much. Working in the fields, you know. And a lot of my day-to-day social life wasn't really that affected. But I was in the moment, a moment of exposing the surreal nature a lot of contemporary society. So even then there are changes. And future work. Okay, so I need to do a more detailed lit review of disability interviews. Margaret Price has given me some very generous suggestions. Like I said, I was an amateur, I just kind of like experimented with what worked. I needed to finish transcribing and analyzing the data. Unfortunately, one of my transcription assistants vanished. I'm still worried. I need to relate the findings back to my interviewees to get feedback, because this is a very collaborative process, and hopefully eventually publish this as a book. I'm an independent scholar. I'm a free agent. If you have leads, please help me out. Thank you.